This ain't Utopia Planitia, believable starship designs. Media properties like Star Trek or Star Wars tell us that space travel is easy and that starships are act like boats or planes. This is a terrible, terrible lie. There is a lot more to spaceflight than common media depictions show, and there's a lot of mileage you can get by knowing some of the principles behind realistic spacecraft design. This discussion was held at the Ad Astra Science Fiction Convention in 2016.
Yeah, I think kind of coming back to the size thing, sort of on the strain we're on right now, a lot of the space for anything is going to be taken up with the gubbins of the launch system. The actual amount of space that you have in there for the people, for the payload, is going to be extremely small, relatively speaking. And every cubic meter, every ton, or whatever that you add in terms of space is going to require exponentially more room in terms of technical stuff.
Just talking back very quickly, I hope, to the Orion idea, which I've known about, of course, for a long time. One thing I never got a handle on, although the idea to some extent is sound, was there ever anybody showed a calculation or an idea of where all these bombs were coming from? I mean, okay, you can have so many bombs you both make and take up with you, but after a while, possibly you're either going to run out or need a friendly alien who can help you manufacture more.
Well, I've heard that the North Koreans actually have a few that...
It'll be a long way away.
In the end, I would just say that would just be like controlling your delta V and managing your delta V the same way you would manage if you were just shooting hot hydrogen out of your engine.
Makes sense.
Also, I understand there's uranium on the moon. I think.
Well, that would certainly make things more convenient if it was there. Then
Yes.
it would bypass a number of technical problems.
Take a lot of your they're small nukes. Like they're in,
Well, yeah, they would have to be for Orion. They would have to be extremely small nukes to work, because obviously you don't want to blow up your own ship. But,
I mean, if you wanted to do it as a desperation measure, like, we have rogue planet coming into the Earth system and it's going to disrupt Earth orbit, our only chance is to get a population off the planet.
Yeah.
We have to do it now. If you wanted to do that, then you can capitalize on the foolishness of the Cold War and just use everything that's been pre-made.
Yeah.
But that's a storytelling element.
Sure, I think there may have been somebody who did this in Star Trek once, but where they had some propulsion problems or something, and so they dumped a bunch of their torpedoes out the back end and detonated it to push them out of the way of something. So there could be sort of an emergency measure. You could even, I suppose, design torpedoes or whatever that could be used as a last-ditch alternative thing.
Yeah.
That would depend on the design of your ship.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what I meant. Yeah.
And there's another factor of, I was told a while back that going much beyond 33% of light speed, you run into what they're calling the crap barrier. There's just enough interstellar matter that is going to pulverize your ship.
Well, you don't even need to go that fast. I mean, debris in Earth orbit, which is a few tens of kilometers a second, is a problem. And going back to the notion of realistic ship design, as I said earlier, so much of this is done for dramatic purpose that you want to, at least in the visual medium, to relate your designs to things that people are familiar with. I remember reading in the first real Star Wars films, the ILM people were reviewing footage of World War II dogfights and modeling their space battles based on to make them look more realistic. That was the exact word. But there's so much of an aviation motif to ship design that really doesn't work. So if I look at something like the Firefly, which I love Firefly, of course. Where did they put the bridge? They put it at the front where you would have the cockpit of a plane. But as Stephen has pointed out, from a debris standpoint, that's probably like the worst place you want to put the nerve center of your ship. You ought to put it in the back where you have as much shielding between you. And you know, there's no realistic reason that anybody's going to be looking out a glass window anyway. It would be all through.
I wouldn't.
I certainly would.
I could see it would be useful as as in extreme emergencies for like taking a star sighting, but you only need one window for that.
Yeah, well, I actually think that I don't see them putting the windows near any nerve center.
Yeah.
But I think they would have observation areas
Yeah.
simply because of the psychological factor.
Yeah, like
Humans are
gentleman
going to
said,
want to
yeah,
go out.
you're
and
gonna
look.
want to look outside, or you're gonna
And
go bonkers.
that opens up some
Deviate.
interesting scenes in your fiction, because you can have the situation where the technology has failed and the person sitting there with the little radio going, yeah, we're 10 degrees off this and you've got to go to the right and they're coming in fast, so you better do this now.
They had one of those in the original 1970s Battlestar Galactica. The Galactica had an observation dome at the top. There was an episode where they were up in that dome.
Yeah, and I think they were doing basically the same thing. We're trying to adopt.
Well, they had found footage of the Apollo program somehow. That's another.
Yeah, but to summarize, Starfleet hates its senior crew because they put them in the most exposed place possible.
Yeah.
But,
They're all red shirts.
Getting to some more nitty gritty. There's only 2 theories that I can recall that actually show things like RCS thrusters going on, and that was Firefly and Space Above and Beyond.
Battlestar Galactica. You can see the Raptors.
and technically speaking, Star Trek does have RCS thrusters because Eric mentioned it already, the Next Generation Technical Manual, that it goes over that. But it also, to me, it also demonstrates why understanding the way starships work is actually kind of important before you start breaking these rules, because you will bring these things in and someone will read this and it's like, well, why didn't they use this to solve X problem? Because when you read when you look at the documents, you discover that what the Enterprise D calls RCS thrusters are actually fusion engines that produce 4 million newtons of thrust. Which is
The
a
thing
lot.
that is missing in a lot of ship design in fiction is you'll see a lot of solar panels, but you'll not see a lot of radiators. And if you're dealing with those levels of energy, even if you were to assume really awesome conversion efficiencies, there would still be waste heat that you would need to dispel at some point.
And that brings me to a point that I wanted to say about, we talked a little about breaking the rules. And you can break rules if you have a rationale. Now, Farscape I really enjoy Farscape, but it's not exactly the most technologically accurate show you'll ever see.
Farting
However,
Muppets? No.
But you have, Moya, the primary ship, is an organic ship, and it was genetically designed for cargo as well. And this is one of the few things that I didn't mind so much, there being these big rooms in, because of heat dissipation. And I could rationalize it that the rooms were there to allow for heat dissipation and a larger surface area on the exterior, because it's an organic entity. Now, what on earth it ever ate, I don't know. But
You're talking about heat dumping. I think one of the more realistic designs that I saw was it was a short little thing, but at the beginning of the Avatar films with James Cameron, they had a large radiative system there for what looked like some sort of primitive fusion drive or something like that. And,
It was I know what you're talking about. It was actually because I've never seen Avatar, but I've seen descriptions of how the craft works. And James Cameron did go to, I think, James Pellegrino, who is an author and a scientist and a Titanic expert, to help with the design. And so the Venture Star was actually launched by a laser pump sail from Earth and decelerated with antimatter engines. And that's why the radiators are so big and blow for 2 weeks.
yeah,
Because of the amount of
tremendous
heat.
length of energy.
And it's just something that's really easy for people when they're putting something together to not even consider it. Like the Hermes in the Martian also has heat radiators, which is incredible.
What about something like Interstellar? One thing that bothered me was the fact that their ships in Interstellar didn't seem to have any fuel anywhere.
You've been trying to say something for quite a while, haven't you?
Well, you guys have been talking a lot about near future, getting off the planet. One of the book series I thought did the technology to design of ships really well was the Honorverse series. And they do all these things. The bridge is in the middle of the ship. We have a backup one, just in case you blew up the first one. We have 2 fusion reactors, just because they're going, not only are we worried about accidents, we're actually going to go into combat where we're shooting at each other. And we need redundancies and backups. And they have the observation cupola with the poor guy in his spacesuit in the evacuated dome with the manual optics and his radio, just in case something goes wrong with the sensor.
In light of the Honorverse, I would just say that yeah, David Weber does think about a lot of those things, but it also does expose the dangers of specifying certain things when you don't fully work through examples, because I have seen examples that David Weber provided size, like dimensions and mass for Honorverse ships, but when someone did the math, found out that given these things that he had established, the dreadnoughts were less dense than cigar smoke.
I think we had a comment about it.
I would just like to point out that one of David Weber's Honorverse, he worked out the technology very specifically to allow him to have Napoleonic era naval battles in space. With lines with spaceships all lining up along a huge line, and it's changing broadside.
And ship of the wall instead of the line.
Yeah, ship of the wall.
So that's really interesting. I mean, let's talk about space battles for a while. So when you described that, David, I was thinking of the iconic scene in greatest Star Trek movie ever, Wrath of Khan, where the Enterprise and the Reliant are like approaching each other like, basically dreadnoughts. And they start pummeling each other with photon torpedoes, which seem like high-tech cannonballs more than anything else. And in space, nobody can hear you scream, perhaps, but in space, people can see you coming from a long, 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 long way. So you would probably be loosing your weapons. You would probably have notice of at least incoming conventional fire hours, days, perhaps potentially even weeks in advance. Which, if we take it to sort of a modern day situation, and this was a topic that came up in a previous panel, there's something called the Outer Space Treaty, which was signed in 1967, and it forbids the stationing of weapons of mass destruction, say on the moon or in high orbit, and this is held up as some brilliant thing for world peace, but the awful truth is that the Outer Space Treaty only codified things that nobody wanted to do anyway because it was pointless. It is actually pointless to station nuclear weapons on the moon because you can see them coming days in advance. Something like a sea-launched ballistic missile, which would be a much more pleasant. Do you want to talk? Maybe I'll open it to the panel about just those battles.
Again, tech level is everything in all of this, because if you're going near future tech, you're probably looking at ships that accelerate up to cruising speed and then are stuck on their flight path. So if you want to do an effective space battle, number one, you have to know the flight path that the ship is on, which gives some interesting things with spycraft and how classified ship flight paths are going to have to be. Then you have to set up some system where you either parallel it going one direction or the other, and if you're paralleling it like this, so you're passing each other and doing the traditional broadside, you have to have some way of getting a craft that can equalize speed with the one that you just counted the geezers out of.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would just say that in terms of space battles, if that's what you're looking for, you would be able to do that. An author would be able to do that sort of thing. But just, especially thinking about the believable bit of it, I have to wonder, if you have this enemy craft coming towards you, and you have the ability to send one of your ships out there and also equalize speed. You also have the ability to shoot essentially a bunch of shotgun pellets that
Fractional
would,
speed
yeah,
projectiles.
yes, that would have their own speed and also the speed of the craft is coming.
And they'd be hard
Yes.
to
Yeah,
detect.
oh, definitely, and I use that. That's what they call it. They call it a Pyrrhic form in what I'm writing because of Pyrrhic victory. And it's basically an agreement between ships that we won't fire ours if you don't fire yours, because it's mutually assured destruction.
Yeah.
Jack Campbell writes a really good military SF series where he equates the ships to the movements to naval battles where you can see them coming from far away. Unless you want to pulverize your crew to jam and stuff, you can't maneuver very quickly. So that they deal with it in two different ways. One is that they all aim at each other, the two opposing sides aim at each other for hours or days to line themselves up, and then they have this short window of opportunity where they throw everything they've got at each other. And then the other way is where they're sort of using the planets are sort of held hostage because the planets can't get out of the way of projectiles. So they'll say, if you don't do what we want, we're going to start dropping things down your gravity well. So that was the other way. But it's rather good military stuff. I quite enjoyed it.
So, guy back there.
Yes, under the Expanse, Jay McAvoy's The Expanse, Season 1, which is recently shown in the sci-fi network. I like the fact that the space, he said, one major space battle on the show between the Martian Dreadnought, a series of unidentified ships. I like the fact the show used different weapons, different tactics, at different stages of the battle. First, the ships were first approaching, he fired off the long-range missile. Actually, several minutes to reach the Martian ship. The Martian ship would respond with its own missiles and countermeasures. As the battle proceeded, he slowly reverted to more close-range weapons and tactics, like using mass fighters, firing projectiles at the ships when they come in close range. So I like the fact that he used a mixture of different weapons, different tactics, and different ranges and stages of the battle.
I think too, one thing that you've got to keep in mind with any kind of a space battle is that ultimately there's a bunch of people that are in a relatively fragile container that, even a relatively small hole in the hull spells certain death for pretty much everybody in there. I mean, there's,
Unless
closing.
it's compartmentalized.
Well, yes, and obviously you got to take that into account, but the actual amount of damage that a space-to-space weapon would be required to generate is really relatively low. It's more a question of making sure you can hit the other guy. If you can hit the other guy, then how much damage you do to him is almost irrelevant. You're going to do catastrophic damage to a ship regardless.
It also comes down, what is your goal of the battle? Is your goal to kill the crew but leave the ship relatively intact so you can salvage it later?
Well, that would be more difficult,
Yeah. Or is it just wipe it out, atomize it?
Yeah.
And also, you're going to have to be very conscious of where your debris is going because you do not want that debris landing on your base if it's irradiated.
And that was something funny I found in the conclusion of Babylon 5, where actually Straczynski is in there pulling the switch, that they blow up Babylon 5 because it will be a hazard to navigation. And I couldn't help thinking that actually a cloud of debris in the Epsilon Eridani system would be worse. So what would have made more sense, and what they will eventually have to do with something like the International Space Station, is actually bring it out of orbit and crash it on Epsilon 3. I can only imagine that maybe Drall would have taken umbrage at that, but that would have actually been more logical than
Or put a booster on it and kick it out and let it fall in the sun over the course of a couple of centuries.
Yeah. There you go, yeah, that's what I probably would have done, but yeah.
May I add that in Gundam, Japanese anime series Gundam, Zeon dropped a 5-mile long cylinder on Australia as a weapon. It blew up. It caused a minor extinction of the planet. It was pretty bad. They brought it home. It was a space colony. They pumped it full of gas, killed the people inside it, then launched the thing at Earth as a weapon.
I think to
You do not want to drop Babylon 5 on a planet.
well, it would have to be an uninhabited planet, I think.
Put a really
Well,
low, really
his
low
draw
grade
was deep underground. He would have been fine.
Yeah, just let it burn up in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Just turn the Babylon station to a big homeless shelter.
There you
Or,
go.
or a museum
It
like
practically
that.
was half
Yeah.
the series. Anyway.
Relocate all the politicians there.
Or just salvage all
Oh,
the
then you can
materials
blow it
that
up.
are right there, easy to take,
Yeah.
with its own docking bay.
This is
I
similar.
think too, oh crap, I lost my train of thought now.
O'Neill cylinders are mostly hauled.
That is true.
It's not like dropping the uranium telephone pole on someone from,
Yeah.
up
Yeah.
200
Well,
kilometers.
it gets back to the point that both Stephen and Cam raised earlier, is that spacecraft, real spacecraft, are actually fairly fragile beasts, and the Star Trek battle that I would like to see, once your shields are down, is that there's actually not a lot.
Just great.
It's like in the newer films, it takes, the Enterprise takes more punishment from that prototype than in the entire series.
Yeah.
It took in the original. It was like, what is this? How's this not vapor?
So, in a way, they did it right. Well, they did many things right in Wrath of Khan. That the unshielded Enterprise was a sitting duck. It was just a few shots pretty much disabled the ship, and that was it.
Yeah. I think any when you're dealing again with any kind of technology where you can move something at superluminous speeds or even relativistic speeds or whatever, like the guy at the back there was saying, dropping something on a planet, it doesn't even have to be 5 miles long. If you can put something at 90% of the speed of light and then you throw it at somebody, it's going to do a lot of damage, even if it's relatively
So
small.
they do in Omniverse, where they have a mass driver, they just drop a 60-kilogram sphere at 0.94 C, and it's like, oh, I don't like this continent.
Yeah.
Damocles kinetic strike package.
Yes.
It's properly named.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think Pellegrino wrote a book about that. It's called The Killing Stars.
Yeah.
Another thing that tends to get ignored with a lot of science fiction spacecraft is the concept of inertia.
Oh yeah.
You don't very often see the crew going like, crap, I'm getting crushed, as the ship is accelerating, hell-bent for leather.
Yeah, the Forever War was really good in terms of acceleration, where they'd have to go into these big tanks and stuff in order to do any fine maneuvering. And again, there was a lot of that, targeting somebody weeks or months away. And most of the time they just ended up having to let the computer do it because, they were all in their, acceleration tanks and couches and everything.
So there's no mass. There's no weight rather, but there's still mass.
Oh,
there's
absolutely, yeah.
inertia, and there's momentum. So we talked about thrusters earlier. In real spacecraft, what a lot of people don't know is that the thrusters are actually not used for maneuvering or orbit raising. It's for momentum management. So in terms of pointing a spacecraft, you have these things called reaction wheels that have to spin up and down. And in order to dump the momentum from those reaction wheels, and by Newtonian force, you need an external force, and that's what thrusters are actually mostly used for in real spacecraft.
There's a real clip in KST where you have to install different reaction wheels and make sure you have enough power to power them in order to, for attitude control.
Right, to power them or either have torque rods or thrusters to dump the momentum when you're done.
And there's another good reason to have relatively small rooms in a spacecraft. And that is, even if you have artificial gravity, if you lose it and you can manage to touch the ceiling and have your feet on the floor, you're still mobile. If the room is bigger than that span, you're can find yourself in the situation of, I'm screwed. Well, I'll take off my shoe and throw it over there, but how many shoes do I have?
Well, what happens on, for example, the space station is that we still have air currents. So if you leave something lying around, it generally ends up getting sucked in a grate somewhere. So if you were just left in the middle of the room, you'll probably end up.
It's like the lost and found. You just go to the nearest grave.
It's going to take you a while to get there, though. That's not what you you wanted a crisis.
I found the cat.
Yeah, I can see one of the cats I know.
Yeah.
That's something I'd love to see.
Cats
A cat in
space.
Yes, a
Yeah.
cat in zero G. How would it react?
They did it on the vomit
Yeah,
comic.
yeah,
They did
exactly.
it on the vomit comic.
Oh, yeah, PETA's going to be on our
I think it's cruel. I saw it and I was really upset for the cat. It had absolutely no understanding, obviously, of what was going on, and it was in total panic. It was awful.
It's 10-2, so did we have any final thoughts from our panel?
Well, if I may make a suggestion, if you're interested in writing, I came across this a few years ago, and if you want a really nice, relatively short synopsis of all the crap that can happen to you, this is it. He's a little bit much on suggesting plots and themes, but for the science, it's actually a nice summary.
What is it called?
What
Writers.
was the Japanese?
Writer's Guide to Creating a Science Fiction Universe.
By
It's in the small print. George Ochoa and Jeffrey Osier.
It's in a horrible yellowish
Ochoa
font.
and Osier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like KSP.
I'll state to the title.
So on the topic of resources, if you're interested in spaceship and spacecraft design, there's a lot of great things out there. Somebody's mentioned, there's people who mentioned Kerbal Space Program many times. There's a professional grade tool called STK, Systems Toolkit, stk.com. You can download the base module for free if you want to play around with things like Earth orbits, really. You can do things like put stations in different cities, and you can predict when a satellite's going to pass overhead. It's kind of useful. There's a guy named, his name is actually Charles Brown, and he's done a thin book that AIAA puts out called Spacecraft Mission Design, which is something you might want to look at. And then at the end of the day, it's a piece of advice that I give to anybody in terms of any kind of scientific or engineering research, is just look people up and talk to them and ask questions. Everybody likes to talk about what they do.
I found a good resource. There's NASA and all the space agencies really have like tons of stuff on the internet. They just keep on putting out there. DARPA's got a lot of stuff. And yeah, I just I have a lot of spaceship design in that one in my first book, and yeah, I just kind of poured through everything that was out there. And well, like you said, there people love to talk about what they do, and they love to post it on the internet. So yeah, so that's more or less what I've used, and I like to try and stay abreast because there's always somebody coming up with new stuff.
I would say another an excellent resource for anyone interested in this is Winchell Chung's website, Atomic Rockets, which has been worked on for the last 17 years and is continually updated as a wealth of information regarding exactly this sort of thing. So it's anyone have any final questions or?
Continue scrolling. EM drive. LOL.
It's the Dean Drive for the 21st century.
Solar.
Well, one that I actually just finished because of an egotist that I'm playing with is the idea of a gravity laser. Yeah, because if you can laze gravity, you don't need your propulsion drive. You can just tow yourself in.
There have been a lot of, well, not a lot. There have been a few writers that do things that way. Have the engines on the front of the ship instead of the back, and
Yeah, and gravity is a particle that behaves like a wavelength. Light is a particle that behaves like a wavelength. Why not?
One final question and comment?
Another resource is of course YouTube videos Particularly Scott Manley.
Scott Manley on the
You
moon.
keep distracted by the cat videos.
Scott Manley not only does
Like the cat in
space
space.
videos,
Cats in space.
but every once in a while he also
Better than
does
pigs in space.
scientific videos as well. For example, one of his most popular ones that actually ended up on the news is the asteroid. If you could see the asteroids without stars in the way, what it would look like, stuff like that.
You're totally right. Scott Manley was actually instrumental in one of the stories that I have sold for that long.
Yeah.
And so I think looks like it's a good time. So that's, thank you all for coming. And I hope
Yeah,
you
thanks for coming.